Just wanted to remind everyone to check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you'll be able to watch a full video episode of the podcast. You even get to watch the video clips that we talk about and break down, and we'll share some of the best moments from the episode on the channel. Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, Britt and I talk about Man of Steel. Clark had two fathers to give him his sense of identity and his purpose. Where do we go to find ours? The only way to receive the validation and love from God is in solitude. We discover new identities and prepare for the battles ahead. Join us as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me from Hotlanta, my buddy Britt. How you doing today, Britt?
Doing all right, man.
We're excited. Britt, you've got like 5 pages of notes. We're going to dive right into this.
Okay,
super excited to bring you a mostly pretty current movie. Britt and I wrestled, and this time I won. So we're doing Man of Steel. I think Britt let me win. 2013, Henry Cavill, Amy Adams, Russell Crowe, Kevin Costner, other people you recognize. It was great film, great new take on the Superman origin story for the most part. I think it's got in the 50s in Rotten Tomatoes. And as we were talking before, I loved how it showed the character development of young Clark Kent as he becomes the man, because that's something that if you've tracked with us for any length of time, you know that that's really what we focus on a lot is our character development and becoming the men that God called us to become. So Britt, why did you say, hey, why did you pull the trigger on this one? And you know, what, as you watched it with your kids the other day, what was like, oh man, this is why I really love this movie?
Well, I have been a big fan of Superman since the mid 90s, probably. I was more a Batman guy, 70s and 80s, Spider-Man, some of that stuff. But in the beginning, when I was younger, Superman didn't interest me all that much. I mean, he's hard to relate to, right? He's bulletproof. He can shoot lasers out of his eyes. He's all powerful, essentially. And they kind of take him to that place.
He's an alien.
And, of course, he's got the kryptonite thing, whatever. But like, you don't really get and he was a fairly flat character when you really think about it, in the sense of he's just kind of that everyman hero. He's he was just always going to be that guy.
Right.
And I think I love the Superman movies, especially Superman 1 and 2 with Christopher Reeve. And so I kind of got a little bit more into Superman, a little more interesting. And I think especially in the 90s, as I started to learn more about character development and writing, and I got into some of the comic books, I started to realize that writing Superman is a very difficult task to me, because you have to challenge Superman with something other than physical strength. Ultimately, you have to challenge him somehow, or unless you bring another Zod who has his similar strength or something like that. But in general, you have to challenge Superman with something other than just straight brute power. And so there were some comics that would do that in very interesting ways, and some better than others. And then, so when Man of Steel came out, I was very interested. This movie came on the heels of The Dark Knight, which is a phenomenal movie. This is I don't know about a perfect movie, but it's pretty darn close. That movie is pretty darn close to a perfect movie, whether it's about Batman or not. And a lot of the same guys were involved with this, like Christopher Nolan and David Goyer kind of came in with the story, and and Christopher Nolan did The Dark Knight, and David Goyer wrote the script for The Dark Knight. So DC was trying to catch up to the Avengers game to a certain degree. Like, let's try to expand this universe. Let's try to get Superman in here. So I was just very interested, and I liked a lot of what they did in this movie. So, they kind of had their own take with it, but I did like a lot of what they did. I love Kevin Costner. We talked about this as Jonathan Kent. I love the casting. Amy Adams as Lois, what they did with Lois and her character. I just thought, and I thought that they really dug into a lot of primal themes: life, death, humanity, power, morality, the value of life, what it means to be a parent, what it means to be an adoptive parent, what it means to be a mother sending your son into the world, which is every mother's struggle. Like, I mean, that's the main
nightmare in some.
Yes, but as this movie shows, like, it's just got some primal elements to it. Like, if Superman's biological mother, she wants to cling to him, she doesn't want to give him up. Yeah. But if she doesn't, life ends. Right. And that's every mother's struggle. If the son doesn't leave, quote unquote, the nest, then the cycle of life ends. Like, these are very primal, biological, but set up and designed by God. I believe this is the design of God, is that we have children, and when we give those children purpose, and we help that to happen. So there's just a lot of those elements that we'll kind of hit on with this movie that I really enjoyed. How the take they took on a lot of things, and I think overall it's well written. Like I said, there's some iffy parts to me, but I think overall it's pretty well written.
I want to hit this one idea that you brought up, this idea of Batman versus Spider-Man versus Superman, not like some Royal Rumble. But if you're a young man or an older man who's young at heart, who still enjoys comic books and action figures, when you look at Batman, he's a hero who he made himself who he was.
Right. Yeah.
Spider-Man is just an ordinary kid who just happened to get bit. Either one of those you can become through circumstance, through working really hard, through breaking into some radioactive animal place and trying to get bit by something. Superman, being an alien, is unattainable. Like, you can't change your DNA. You can't change the fact that you're a human being. That's core. And so I think that's interesting when you're talking about these superheroes that appeal to us, that when you look at somebody like Superman, you're like, yeah, I can never be like that. And he really, especially in those early days, he was put on a pedestal. Like, he was the embodiment of truth, justice, in the American way.
Right.
He said at the end of how that colonel or general asked him, how can I be sure you're going to you support America's issues, or, our stance in this? And he's like, I'm from the middle of Kansas. You can't get much more American than that. But it also sort of reminded me of the line in Joshua, where Joshua's getting ready to go tackle Jericho and sees the angel of the Lord dressed for war. And he's like, whose side are you on, us or theirs? He's like, neither. I'm on the Lord's army. Are you going to align with me or what? And so that idea. But one of the things I think that resonates especially with this movie and why we love it, Clark's wrestling with big questions. Good. Questions that we all deal with. Where have I come from? Who am I? And why am I here? If we had concrete security in those answers to those questions, we would live a very confident and secure life. And the thing is, we do have those answers. It's just sometimes we don't. As we'll probably discuss a little bit, this idea of faith and trust. We might know the answers, but it's really hard to trust the answers that we know to be true.
Right. Well, and I think Superman also struggles with this question: what do I do with the power I have?
Right.
And I think young men, especially, young men have this problem with their brains where we feel like we're invincible. And that leads young men into very precarious situations. It's why they get 18-year-olds to join the army and send them off to war. Oh, sure, just go head first into bullets. Okay, you know, but you know, I'm making fun of it. But I was that kid where if you had said, "Hey, get on your bike and try to jump this creek," and you know, whatever. Okay. And you get a little older.
Just take for a minute. Just consider back to your teenage years and consider all the stupid stuff that we did.
All the dumb stuff.
Whether it's climbing a tree that's no thicker than my wrist, or as you mentioned, trying to jump a bike over a creek, or riding a skateboard down a hill like it's a luge. Without a helmet, because those didn't exist.
So I do think that Superman, though, can have value as a writing, as a metaphor for that. Okay, what do you do with that ability? Let's say you are immortal. Let's say you are invincible. Let's say you are indestructible, which is not true to humans. But let's just say you are. What do you do with that? And then there's an inherent problem with feeling that way. You start to feel better than others. You start to feel better than the old people. You start to feel better than, right? Well, and I hear it from kids all the time. Oh, I can do that. And there's this overconfidence that I don't want to squash necessarily, but you do want to redirect it. And I think that's the role of parents. The role of parents is to say, okay, you have ability, you have strength, you do have power. Now the question is, what are you going to do with it? And I think that he struggles with that through the movie. And I think as Christians, we've been given literally the power of creation in our hearts. The Holy Spirit, the Creator, lives in me. What do I do with that? Is it put there to lord it over people and to become Zod and tell people I'm going to remake the world in my own image? No, I don't think so. Or has it been put there for a different reason? To self-sacrifice, to show compassion, to value life, right? And so I think that there's a lot of different themes within this that Zack Snyder, a lot of them, I think he intentionally dove into, or he and Christopher Nolan, right? I think they intentionally tried to dive into some of these deep themes that really gave Superman some more depth rather than just he can fly and he can punch really hard, right? You know?
Yeah. He has laser eyes. Yeah.
Which is cool.
Well, yeah. Well, and it goes back to what you said earlier, is the challenge in writing for Superman is you have to find a challenge that is something other than physical strength. I've realized through the course of this journey is like, I enjoy these stories in movies when I can connect with somebody. Can I connect to an alien with superhuman strength? Nope.
Right.
Can I connect to a person who's struggling to find his identity and calling and purpose? Yeah, we can all
right.
We can all do that. And so that's what I think they do a really good job in this movie, and where we want to talk about. There's obvious parallels with Superman in Jesus, and they are highly intentional. This was marketed sort of as a Messiah movie. He's 33 years old. He was brought up by a father other than the one who, created him, begot him. Even on Krypton, they basically had a supernatural birth there because he was the first birth in centuries that was natural, that wasn't a cloned being, right?
Yeah, it's a very nativity type scene there in the beginning. It's a very nativity type scene.
And just like Jesus, he has to go, like Jesus went through an initiation.
Good.
He didn't pop out preaching. He didn't pop out and go straight to Jerusalem to die. He had to experience life as a human. We want to talk about the idea of our character development, the idea of answering those questions that we have, and what that requires of us. Because a lot of times we're like, we receive this gift, right? And this is what Kevin Costner's, Jonathan Kent, his voice is always like, yeah, you've got these gifts, you've got these powers, but what are they for? They're going to change the world, but how will that be shaped? Even the line, where he's like, you're the answer to the question that we're not alone, and are we alone in the world? He's like, we're not alone, but we're not alone isn't always a comforting thing. When Zod shows up, you are not alone is a terrifying moment. And so when you look in the Bible, whether it's Joseph or it's Jacob or it's Moses, whether it's Jesus, there is a time between sort of them knowing who they are and sort of knowing that their time. How do we know when our time has come? I think is a good question that we all struggle to ask. Because we want our time to come. We want to live, we want to use our gifts and abilities in the service of the kingdom of God. But Britt, as you've often said, that line from Watchman Nee, even when we try to use our gifts in the service of God, they're actually not being offered in the service of God.
Absolutely. Watchman Nee, who says some very interesting things, but I really learned a lot from his writings. And, he talked about how essentially we can't use our natural talents and abilities, our human natural talents and abilities in the service of the kingdom of God because they have to be first redeemed. Because when they're ours, then we're using them for our own sake. We're using them, and the temptation becomes to use whatever talent that is to bring attention to ourselves. And if we don't learn, and to Watchman Nee's point, and I think we see this throughout the Bible with Abraham and Isaac and other things through other stories, and even Jesus, if we don't lay that idea down, if we're not content with no one ever knowing our name, with no one ever knowing we did anything, then God can't really use us. Like our contentment has to be that God knows we did it. That our contentment has to be that heaven saw it, that the eternity saw it. Because if we do it for the applause of men, that can be manipulated for evil means. And so therefore God wants our hearts to be in the right place. And it is not until we are, I'm going to cry when I say this, it's not until we're content with solitude that he can put us in front of anybody. And it's not because he doesn't want to put us in front of people. He gives us dreams. He calls us. He like it, and there's nothing wrong. It's part of who we are as his creation and new creation to want to have purpose. To want to live in purpose. But the core purpose has to first be that God is pleased, whether people see it or not. And it can't be for me, because it's only in his glorification that my good exists. That's the only way that works. And so this is something that Clark Kent, to come back to the movie, has to struggle with. He has to struggle with, what's my identity? And the voice of his earthly father is so important in this movie. And Kevin Costner is such an amazing actor anyway. He was so perfect for this. Yeah. But Jonathan Kent in the movie keeps pointing him back to his character. Yes, you can do amazing things, but who are you? What kind of person are you? And these are similar conversations that I have with my son. yes, you are talented. You have talent. You're intelligent. You have all of this potential. But my main concern is your heart. Because if you have the right heart, you can do anything. But
Right.
if you don't have the right heart, then your talents, like I said before, can be manipulated and used for evil designs, which is the contrast you get with Zod. That's Zod, right? That's the evil mirror of Superman from the comic books and from the 80s movies, right? And now again, like that, he's the evil mirror of Superman, where he doesn't care about human life. He doesn't care about people. He has no compassion. He just has a mission that doesn't and he's going to do this at all costs, even if that means hurting people. And and it's going to be for his own, right? I'm mixing up some of the things. Like he doesn't really say this in the Man of Steel, but like in Superman 2, it's always kneel before Zod, right? It's like kneel before me,
Right?
And it's about him, right? And he thinks that he even says it at one point in Man of Steel. I was programmed for this. I was meant to have this ability over others and lord it over people. And so anyway, you see those contrasts.
Yeah, and I want to play that clip with Jonathan Kent's conversation with Clark here in just a minute. But I love that contrast of a mission at all costs. And we see that with Moses, right? Moses realizes he's a Hebrew son, and he sees an Egyptian, slave master beating on one of the Israelites, and he takes matters into his own hands. I have a mission at all costs. I got to free my people. Joseph had his dreams. He's like, and it alienated his brothers because he's like, I had a dream. I got to tell you about it. Even though he knew that and again, it propped himself up. And same thing with Jacob, where he was a deceiver. He was shrewd. He was cunning, but he used that for his own purposes and it left a wake of hurt people behind him. And so as we're growing, as we're doing this, because we are all, whether we are 14 or 40 or 80, as long as we're still breathing, God's still maturing us. We are still in the sanctification process. Construction is still ongoing. Renovation continues. It's just like probably I would say that our highway here in Charlotte, but I'm thinking Atlanta is the same way. There is always construction going on the interstates. Oh my God. So I want to take a look at this clip, and it's relatively early in the movie, but Clark, and it's interesting how they show things, because in the scene, the bus goes over the bridge, but immediately before that, one of the kids is all up in Clark's face, calling him names, doing all this stuff. Bus goes over the bridge into the water, and now Clark has a decision. I can rescue them. Should I do that? He makes the choice to push the bus out of the water, to go back in, to save the bully. And it freaks out this kid because he's like, I know I saw Clark do that. It was a miracle. It's an act of God, all this stuff, because what they saw didn't make sense. And so Jonathan Kent, Kevin Costner's voice here, goes out to speak to young Clark about this idea of knowing when it's your time and why you need to wait.
I just wanted to help.
I know you did, but we talked about this. Right? Right? We talked about this. You have... Oh, Clark, you have to keep this side of yourself a secret.
What was I supposed to do? Just let him die?
Maybe. There's more at stake here than just our lives, Clark, or the lives of those around us. When the world finds out what you can do, it's going to change everything. Our beliefs, our notions of what it means to be human, everything. You saw how Pete's mom reacted, right? She was scared of Clark.
Why?
People are afraid of what they don't understand.
Is she right? Did God do this to me? Tell me.
We found you in this. We were sure the government was going to show up at our doorstep, but no one ever came. This was in the chamber with you. I took it to a metallurgist at Kansas State. He said whatever it was made from didn't even exist on the periodic table. It's another way of saying that it's not from this world, Clark. And neither are you. You're the answer, son. You're the answer to are we alone in the universe?
I don't want to be.
And I don't blame you, son. It'd be a huge burden for anyone to bear. But you're not just anyone, Clark, and I have to believe that you were sent here for a reason. All these changes that you're going through, one day you're going to think of them as a blessing, and when that day comes, you're going to have to make a choice. A choice of whether to stand proud in front of the human race or not.
Can I just keep pretending I'm your son?
You are my son. But somewhere out there, you have another father, too, who gave you another name. And he sent you here for a reason, Clark. And even if it takes you the rest of your life, you owe it to yourself to find out what that reason is.
I think we could pretty much talk the rest of the time just on that one clip.
Good Lord. I got teary-eyed when I watched that scene when he says, "You are my son."
Yeah.
Look, man, I mean, that. Mothers and fathers are supposed to work together for this. And this movie shows it brilliantly. And I know we live in an age where we want to say there's no difference between men and women. And, we get all sort of like gender neutral and whatever. Like, okay, believe what you want. But this movie reveals why we need a mother and a father. Why God designed it this way. It's biologically designed this way. Like, this is God's design. This was before the fall. This was designed, right? And what does Jonathan and Jor-El, what do they both teach him? They teach him self-sacrifice. This is utterly important. As a father, one of the main things you teach is self-sacrifice. They watch you sacrifice yourself for the love of others. They see you do it. And that's that whole scene with the tornado. That's why that scene's there. If Clark doesn't see this, then he will make his power about himself. But when he sees, no, being a man means self-sacrifice. That's what being a man is. And he sees it in Jor-El too, right? He sees truth, standing up for what's right and good. And here in that conversation, the father says, you have an identity. You are my son. And we could watch it, but listen back through it. How many times does he say son in that conversation? I don't blame you, son. He just keeps calling him son, son, son. and then purpose. You get an identity from your father and you get a purpose from your father. That's what you get from your father. That's your father's role. That's your job. Your job as a father isn't simply to provide money. Although you should. I mean, like, you don't want your kids to starve, like, you know, right? But those are the elements that true manhood brings to the table. You stand for truth. You stand for what's right and good, right? And you have identity, you have purpose, and you see self-sacrifice. What do Martha and Lois teach him? This is important. They teach him gentleness. They teach him patience, endurance, compassion, and a different kind of strength that's not physical. They teach him a different strength that isn't physical. And they aren't in competition to each other. They're supposed to go together. In sex, you come together and become one. Like the mother and the father are supposed to work in conjunction with one another to bring a real human to the surface, to bring a true human to bear upon the world. Because you're not just sending a lawyer or a doctor. That's not who you're sending out into the world. You're sending a different human being out into the world for them to realize their calling. And if you don't give them this, now other people can, right? Like he's an adoptive father. Like I've had mentors help me with this, both male and female, besides my own parents who did a great job. But I've had mentors in the church do this. And this is part of what Clark has to learn, to be different than Zod and to be the person he was called to be. And you can talk after, we don't have to go there now, and to accept the power of solitude. He has to understand both of those things, because if you don't understand self-sacrifice, you don't understand solitude. You don't get it. You don't get it. And so, and compassion and patience. If you don't understand these things in conjunction with one another, then you will not accept the solitude it takes to develop your gift. Period.
I mean, you and I both had parents who spoke life into us, but there's probably a lot of listeners who lost a mom whose father disappeared. You know, my grandson, you know, he sees his dad maybe every few months. And how is he going to grow up saying, well, my dad wasn't even there? Some dads are there and they're abusive.
Right.
Some moms are there and they're abusive and cause trauma and wounding. And where do we turn if that's our life story? And so in that gap where we lack, and for me, the Jonathan Kent is so representative to me of Joseph in Jesus' life, the father who was chosen to raise the Messiah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And teaching him, it's not your time, but this is what it's like. This is how it's supposed to be. But at the same time, we do have a true father. We can turn to God for the validation, for the identity, for the purpose. But the only way that we can learn to receive the validation and the love from God is in solitude. Because if we're doing it as a result of our gifting, well, look at what I did for you. Look at what I did. I used my gifts for the kingdom. I used my gift for the kingdom. Well, all we're doing is now we're receiving our validation from what we're doing. We're receiving our compassion and sympathy for who we are. Again, the source is not ourselves. The source is our service. The source is our production.
Good.
And it's only through solitude. It's only in solitude. It's only in hiddenness that we can develop the character that will be required when Zod shows up.
Exactly. So in the movie Man of Steel, Clark, you know, his father dies, and sacrifices himself to keep the secret and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's just a lot of, it's a powerful moment. And and what you see kind of interspersed, it kind of starts in the beginning, but they kind of intersperse this throughout the movie here in the beginning is Superman, Clark, Kal-El is doing normal everyday jobs. He's living a normal life, right? He's a waiter. He, works as a
fisherman.
He's not a very good fisherman, right? I mean, like he has to learn these things. And as he learns these things, he's learning what it means to be human. And Jesus had to do this. Jesus was a carpenter. Jesus had to, at 12 years old, knew who he was. Don't you know I have to be about my Father's business? But it says his parents scolded him and he went back and submitted himself unto them. And it said he grew in wisdom and stature by just doing life. By no one knowing you're the Son of God, by no one knowing who you really are, except for possibly Mary and Joseph, right? No one really knowing who you are, and you not exposing who you are to people yet. He just lived life, and I think that this is so important because we see this time and again through the Scripture, through not just Jesus. We see this through people like Moses, like Jacob, like Joseph, where like Abraham, where they are called and they respond, and or they try to respond, and there's a Paul, Saul, who becomes Paul. You sort of see it in his life. He's not knocked off the horse one day and blinded and then comes to Jesus and Barnabas takes him to Antioch. It's not the next day, right, that he becomes a missionary.
Well, and I would even
they say it's when you look 14 years.
Yeah, when you look at Paul, before he gets knocked off the horse, he has a passion for the church.
Oh, sure.
He has a passion for the religious system that he believes in. And when Jesus knocks him off the horse, when Jesus intervenes, Paul believes he's doing Yahweh's work with passion, with excellence, with thoroughness. He is serving out of the sense of self. He thinks for the kingdom of God, but it's just for himself until Jesus intervenes. But like you said, he does. What happens next isn't he starts preaching, right?
Well,
because that would just be a continuance of his using his service in his own strength.
Yeah, exactly. What's interesting to me is in Acts, he does immediately preach, but then he goes silent. It's almost like Barnabas takes him under his wing and says, just come with me. Let me father you for a while.
Yeah.
Like Barnabas both saw his potential in the kingdom, but also knew you had to wait for the timing. And it was when they were fasting and praying, some say 13 or 14 years after his conversion, just living with believers in the church, just serving, just listening, being discipled by Barnabas, right? Just living this life. And having his mind changed over time. Then they were fasting and praying, and God said, separate unto me Paul and Barnabas, or Saul and Barnabas. Actually, Barnabas and Saul. Barnabas was still kind of the lead guy there. But then now he's using his gift. And he grows in his gift. And if you read Paul's letters, you see what he says. He says, I didn't make myself an apostle. This is God who did this. I didn't do this. I'm not, in my own strength, I'm a sinner of sinners, right? I'm the worst. But God made me this. God did this, not me. And so I'm confident in who he's made me. And so, you ask, like, where do we get this if we don't have it in our own life? Because because we have human parents, we're going to have some lack, period. I don't care how great your parents are. You're going to have some lack, because even Mary and Joseph weren't perfect, right? But yes, you find it in two places primarily. You find it, like you said, in relationship with the Father of God, but you also find it in the church. You also find it in the community. I'm telling you that I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure that Saul, who becomes Paul, was mothered and fathered in the kingdom by way more other people than just Barnabas. I think he learned. I think he had to learn how to listen to other people and humble himself, because then he could write, submit yourselves to one another. This is God's will. Like, he could say that because he was like, let me tell you what I had to go through. I thought because he thought he had all the answers at 25 or however old he was when he's putting Christians in prison. Like, he thought, which most young men at 25 think they've got all the answers. But, he thought he had it all figured out. And he was humbled. But then it's a different message. And so for Clark Kent, he learns how to be human in solitude without anybody watching him, without putting it on social media. God told me something on Sunday. He said, fall in love with the secret place. Because Jesus did. You don't think Jesus was in love with the secret place with his Father? It says, as was his custom, he got up every morning and went away to pray. You don't think he fell in love with that time? You don't think that was the source of everything else he did? And I'm telling you, God does want to use me and you. He wants to use the gifts that he's given us, but he has to use them. And it has to come from a place of solitude with him. And that's what Superman learns, because when you do, you're not saving people to get noticed. You're saving people. And Jesus didn't save people to get noticed, right? He didn't heal people to get noticed. In fact, he tried to avoid it. But you're doing it because it's out of love and purity.
What I really loved about that idea, fall in love with the secret place. I'm mad, Britt, because you didn't bring that line up in our pre-talk. And it's beautiful, because what happens when Superman goes to the Fortress of Solitude? He has a conversation with his father.
Exactly.
He asks him all the questions. What is it? I have so many questions. And that's our solitude. Our Fortress of Solitude is to go ask God our questions. Take him our questions, and not what should I eat for dinner or what should I wear today. You could ask him that. But who am I? How should I father them? How should I treat my wife? What should I take this job? Ask him those questions. The Wild at Heart guys have been doing this series on sort of saying how we're a disciple of the internet, because a disciple is someone who turns to teaching for guidance, and how often we turn to the internet for guidance, for education, for what should I do next, and how that information, we get thousands of responses in less than a second. And so when God doesn't respond in a second or a day, it's really hard to be patient and think that, yeah, right.
Or 20 years or 40 years.
Right. But you look at Moses goes off into the wilderness, and he becomes content being a shepherd and a father and a husband. And God shows up in a burning bush and says, oh, well, I've got a different calling. Remember that thing that you felt 40 years ago? That's actually what your mission and your calling. For Joseph, you had these dreams, and yes, you feel like it puts you in these places, but there's actually a deeper purpose to it. As you've brought that up. The chains put iron in his bones. But how do we approach that idea of the solitude, the secret places, the hidden places? Well, there's a path that we follow, and Jesus calls us to it. He says, take the lowest seat at the table. And take it not to say, look, I'm sitting here with the lowlifes, with the scums, the kind of to show off. Again, service to yourself, masquerading as service to the kingdom. But to the point where you're like, I'm good here. I'm good at this table. I'm good eating with these people, eating with this food, waiting till the end to eat, because that's the lowest table, is the last people to eat when they're already cleared off the main table. They're done eating, right. And I'm about to get my food.
That's so good.
You take this approach, and I've been trying to, and it's hard. It's so difficult. It's the secret place. It's the hidden place. And I was invited to become a leader of a team at church. And I was super excited because I was like, oh, it was dealt with photography and content creation and all this. I'm like, oh yes, finally. Which is probably a warning signal.
Right.
And at the same time, I'm having conversations with my daughter. This is before she's moving in. And I'm getting frustrated because I can't find days to give her to watch Kaysen. I've promised her 2 days a week to watch my grandson so that she can work. And I'm like, you realize that, like, I was going on a trip. I was going to Colorado. It's like, you realize by me watching Kaysen these 2 days, I've no space left this week. And her response was, you promised to do this 2 days a week. And I'm like, if I'm overwhelmed with the calendar that I currently have, why am I looking to add more? And that became the season of, hey, if God's not making it impossible for me to do, I'm going to turn it down. I'm going to not do it, because it's like, that's me doing it. If I can put it down and God doesn't force me to pick it back up, it's just me doing it. Like, I can't not take care of my grandson. I can't not do some of the programs and the stuff that I have been doing. You know what I cannot do? I can say, hey, I don't think I can do that leader thing. And guess what? Nobody's asked again. Nobody's forcing me to do that. Because I realized, I was like, oh, wait, I'm jumping at the opportunity to leave the table, the lower table. I'm not making it, God's not making it impossible for me to leave. It's look, there's a seat at that table. Man, it looks like they're getting a better cut of beef than the chuck roast I'm getting. It's like, they got some ribeye at that table. I can move to that table. But what we're called, and what Paul talks about, I have learned to be content in every situation. And I think especially for men, being content while being hidden, while feeling hidden, while feeling invisible, while choosing solitude. Like you said, it's the only way to listen. It's the only way to hear the voice of God is in solitude, but it's also the only way to live it, to choose it, to experience it. The only way Paul could write that is by doing it.
Right. In both movies, I'm going to go from Superman, the first Superman with Christopher Reeve, and in this one, what comes after his moment in the Fortress of Solitude? So in the original movie, whatever, 1970, what was it, 9? In the original movie, he talks with Jor-El.
Sarah will know and correct us.
Oh yeah, right. In the original movie, he talks with Jor-El there too for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm your Kryptonian extraplanetary father, right? I'm your other father. I'm your father.
I'm your ghost father.
And in The Man of Steel, which we're talking about, it's Jor-El appears to him and talks to him. They both give him the suit. They give him his identity and they give him the suit. Like in the original with Christopher Reeve, they don't show that, but you see the transformation. And it was one of my favorite scenes of the original Superman is where the father, Jor-El, Marlon Brando, his face kind of becomes like crystal. And then you go through his eye, and what's on the other side is Superman. And for the first time, he flies. After getting the word from his father of who he really is. And the same thing happens in Man of Steel. After he gets the suit and the word from his father, this is who you really are. This is where you've come from. You're not from this world. You're not from this place, but you can change this place, but you can affect this place. But that word only really comes in solitude. Identity, purpose, that it only comes in solitude from the Father. And then in Man of Steel is when he learns to fly right after that. He gets the suit and then he learns to fly. So it's the same thing. He doesn't fly yet. In both movies, there's no flying. He might be fast and strong, but the flying doesn't happen until solitude. Something transformational has to happen in solitude. And the same thing happens with Jesus. He's called away after he's baptized and the Father says, "This is my son, and I'm so pleased with him." The Spirit drives him into the desert to fast and be tempted for 40 days. Where no one saw him. There was the only way anyone could have ever known the conversation he had with the devil in the wilderness was if Jesus told them later. Right? He was like, "Let me tell you what happened." And why would Jesus tell them that? Because you're going to have to go through it too. I did this for you, but God's going to call you to the wilderness at times too. Right? The children of Israel are delivered from Egypt. And they go directly into the wilderness. They don't go straight there to the promised land. They have to endure.
Why? And why?
Why? Because God. Go ahead, say it.
They weren't ready for the battles they would have to face.
They weren't ready for the battles they would have to face. They didn't have the character to enter the promise yet. And God gave them a chance, but they had to wait for a whole other generation to get there. Right? I got to start over with a whole other generation because I gave, and even Moses couldn't enter it, right? Because he's like,
right.
you hit the rock
because he made it about him. Yeah.
He made it
I said,
about
speak
him.
to the rock, not hit it.
And there's so much symbolism.
But you had to be a showman.
Right? But my point is for men, it's something that we've lost in the culture in which we record everything we do and we have a meal and we put it on Facebook and we meet somebody and we put it on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or whatever you Twitter, whatever you use. You got to say anything that pops in your brain or whatever.
You took the trash out. You make sure everybody in your family knows, hey, I took the trash out. And again, I'm not saying there aren't times to say what God wants you to say and express truth in life and be vulnerable. There are those moments. God told me this a long time ago. When I was learning some things. I'm always learning, like you said. But a long time ago, he said, there are some things you will only get from me alone. And there are some things you will only get from the church. There's some things you will only get from me, just me in solitude. There's some things, but there are some things that even God won't give you alone, right?
Like Clark, Jesus, like they had the influence of parents, right? There was something that happened to them in community that had value too. It's not just one thing. It's how they work together. But I feel like we have come to this point in our culture, and this is like 5 years ago. They did this study where they asked kids what they want to be when they grow up. Remember this study? Where like in the 80s,
No.
like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a doctor. I want to be an astronaut. And like 2010, they asked kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? They said famous.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's dangerous, man. That's dangerous. And I feel like we've lost the ability to appreciate solitude and aloneness and the value of it, when it was a major part of Jesus's life, not the only part, but it was a major part of Jesus's life. And think about what David went through when no one was around. He was called a man after God's own heart, alone with sheep, right? And learned how to throw a stone with a sling and play the harp and write worship songs. Like he learned all that with nobody watching him, for no other reason than to protect the sheep and to worship God all on his own. And God brought him to prominence, right? And I'm just saying, like, we see this time and time again. And that was one of the many things I saw in this movie that it convicted me, especially since I heard that word from God recently, like fall in love with the secret place. I'm like, okay.
So as we wrap up, can you fall in love with the secret place? With being hidden, with being invisible? What I wrote down is, can you be okay with being hidden in the palm of his hand? Because the truth is, you are hidden in the palm of his hand. When you feel like no one sees you, no one knows you, that the world is passing you by and you're left behind, the truth is that you're right there. And if Jesus had to wait for his time, how many times did he say, my time has not yet come?
Mm-hmm.
My time has not yet come. Even in that earlier clip, Jonathan Kent was saying, this is a burden no one should have to bear. Like, that's the reason for our character development, is not to be famous, not to be seen, not to be noticed. But it will be a burden. You know, even in that scene that when Clark was deciding whether or not to turn himself in, and he's sitting there in the church and he's got the stained glass of Jesus at Gethsemane behind him.
Yeah, right.
I mean, some things were subtle, some weren't. But that idea of waiting for your time to come, being willing to take that lower seat, because the truth is that that's what the world needs. And it's only in the solitude, only in the quiet places that you can hear the voice of God coming to you in what you need. And it's through the people that you surround yourself with. Because it wasn't just the voice of his true father that Clark heard. He heard the voice of Jonathan. He heard it of Martha, of Lois, of the other people, even to the kid who lent him a hand to stand up after they had knocked him down.
Here's the lie of fame. Fame makes you think you were seen, because you said it. No one sees me. But fame is a lie. No one really does see you when you're famous. I mean, look at any actor or musician who becomes famous. They feel more alone than they ever did before, more isolated than they ever did before. The only true way we are seen is in that place of aloneness with God, in that closet, in that secret place. That's the only place we really feel seen and heard. Because if God sees you and hears you, then you're seen and heard, period. Like, that's it. Like, there's no competition. And there's a line, I'm trying to remember exactly where it is. You might have to look it up, the full verse. But there's a line about when Christ appears, we appear with him. Like, when is God going to reveal my gift? When he's revealed. That's the point of it. He hasn't given me the gift to reveal me. He's given me a spiritual gift to reveal himself through me. And so whenever God decides to reveal himself, if I'm in him, guess what will happen? Then I'll be revealed. But man, do you know how much God does in secret? God told me one time I was praying, he was like, if you knew, you don't know all that I do. I do so many things that you have no clue that I do. And just rest that I'm working. Jesus says my Father is always working, but we don't see it, right? And just to trust in that. And again, that doesn't mean you never talk with people. That doesn't mean you're a hermit. That doesn't mean you just sit around and look at your belly button, but that means you appreciate the value of that solitude and finding that contentment and knowing that therefore, when he is revealed, we'll be revealed with him.
Because that's what you see is in that solitude, Superman received the strength and the conviction and the mission and the identity and everything that he needed to go out and change the world.
Exactly.
So, Britt, thank you for this conversation. It was super encouraging to me, as all of them have been.
Me too, man. Thank you.
And so I want to close with the clip. It's in a sort of a junkyard. Some bullies had pulled Clark out of the car, and he's sitting there holding the fence. They're mocking him. They're like, come on, you're going to do something. You're going to do something. And when a buddy offers him a hand to stand up, you see the fence post all twisted because it's the strength that he's been holding back. And this idea of that harness strength in the hidden strength, I think is the more appropriate term in this situation. But his dad sees it. Jonathan sees it and comes over and asks him how he's doing. And so as we close and you listen to this clip, wherever you are, I want you to think about what you're being called into, where you're being asked to be hidden, not because you're less than, but because of the value of what you have to offer is so much more than you can even fathom, but you don't want to release the gift before it's ready.
Did it hurt you?
You know they can't.
It's not what I meant. I meant, are you all right?
I wanted to hit that kid. I wanted to hit him so bad.
I know you did. I mean, part of me even wanted you to, but then what? Make you feel any better? You just have to decide what kind of man you want to grow up to be, Clark, because whoever that man is, good character or bad, he's going to change the world.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?